Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our conversation of Homer's Odyssey to book number 2, Telemachus Sets Sail. Real quickly, if you haven't followed our earlier lectures, I hope you hit learnstrong.net, that AP folder for sure. Watch our preliminary lectures on the Odyssey as well as Odyssey number 1, book number 1. Let's do a quick summary of book 1. Of course, our invocation of the Muse. Athena, as Mentis comes down and spends time on Ithaca, and here we see Telemachus' mission. She tells Telemachus at line 340, it's time to grow up, and in fact Telemachus is going to be sent on his mission here in the second book. We learned a lot in book 1 about Xenia, that idea of hospitality, and the ways in which the suitors are violating every rule of Xenia, and that's a big dog deal, right? Now the hope is you read on your own, use me for some kind of help as you come to it. Our learning theory as well, let's remind ourselves that connecting of new information to old information in meaningful ways. We do that through our annotative process of answering 3 guiding questions. At level 1, what does the text say? Summary. At level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages. At 2B, rhetoric, not what Homer says, but how he says it. We're concentrating at 2B at symbolism and irony. We're going to try and see, we'll see a lot of it in this book. And then finally at level 3 we ask, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? At 3A, relating to other texts, especially the Iliad, because we've spent our time with Iliad, we're going to ask some similarities. And then finally, of course, we're asking, how can I relate to this information personally? Let's do a real quick, brief review of Odyssey 2, and then we'll hit some lines to finish our lecture. We have an assembly that's called by Telemachus. Of course, Athena has told him to do this. And right away, Aegyptus, an old man who's been around for a long time, who in fact lost his son in the Trojan conflict, says that we haven't done this get-together project, this assembly, since Odysseus left. There better be some man who has called it. And interestingly, ironically, Telemachus will say, I am the man. He immediately will begin to talk about the trouble that has struck his house. He's speaking, of course, of the suitors. But he'll point out, ironically, he said, I'm a man, but here he says that he's a boy and he would fight them off, the suitors, if he could. He says that you owe it to my father to do something about these nasty suitors. And then he throws down the staff that he's holding that allows him to speak, and he begins to cry, which tells us that Telemachus is an adolescent, right? His feelings go the full range, right? He's so upset he cries. And we're told that the assembly will pity him. Antinous, and by the way, the names here, we have 2 names in this book that I want to point out to you. Nous means mind, so Antinous means the one without mind, okay? That is not very thoughtful. Antinous will in fact say, no, to the assembly. It's not our fault as speaking for the suitors. It's rather Telemachus' mother's fault. Penelope is a liar, and then we get the whole story about her weaving for 3 years and unweaving at night to be able to convince them that she will marry them after she gets this done. Antinous will say, you must tell your mom to remarry. Telemachus will say, I cannot send my mother away. She's the one that raised me. You have to leave. And then he says it, I'll call down from Zeus, I'll call down vengeance. And it's right at that moment that we have 2 eagles that come into flight. They fight with each other, and then they fly off to the right. We know from the Iliad that thing about going to the right is always a good sign then. And Halitherses, the old man who's a reader of signs, predicts Odysseus' return and that the suitors are going to get jacked. Eurymachus, who's another one of the bad guy suitors, will in fact tell the old man Halitherses to shut up, and in fact he says, if you keep this up, we're going to jack both Telemachus and you, right? And in fact he says it as well. We're not leaving Odysseus' house. We're going to stay here. Telemachus finally will finish the assembly by saying, I need 20 men and a ship, and I'm leaving to seek information on my father. We then have Mentor who steps up. And by the way, names matter in book 2, and here another one, Mentor. Our word to mentor comes from this character. He has good advice. He says it's sad that Odysseus has now become forgotten, and he yells at the old men of Ithaca for allowing all of this to happen. We get one more suitor, Lucretius, who will step up, and he will say, you need to shut up, old man. And he says, If Odysseus does come back, we'll kill him, right? Telemachus, he says, will never make this trip either. And all of a sudden, the assembly is over. Telemachus will go off on his own to the beach, pray to Athena. She shows up now as mentor. We see this regularly through the Odyssey, just like we did, like for example, Poseidon taking the form of Calchas. Here we'll have the same deal going on. And she'll say something that echoes a sentiment from the Iliad. She will say, your father was Odysseus, be like your father. We hear this a lot. You'll remember that Phinox, for example, will say in the assembly, book 9 of the Iliad to Achilles, be like your father Peleus, make him proud, right? And then Athena will give, through Mentor, the suggestion, pack up, travel, I'll get a ship for you. And then Telemachus comes back, and Teneus will in fact invite him to come and eat and drink with him. He even says it, we'll let you go. Telemachus says, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. I will find a way to jack you. And then the suitors start to mock Telemachus, for example, calling him, hey, he's a drifter, just like his father. Telemachus goes down to the storeroom to pack rations. There, Euryclea, his servant, who we've already met. By the way, Euryclea, you can hear maybe even Kleos in Kleos glory, right? Euryclea just means world famous or everywhere famous. In other words, Euryclea is going to be a really important and influential character. She will say to Telemachus, don't go. When Telemachus says, have courage, old woman, I have to go, but don't tell mom, Euryclea will say, your secret's safe with me. The keeping of secrets, let's put it in our notes, a major part of the Odyssey. We'll see how that works. Athena then, as mentor, goes off to collect warriors and to get a ship rounded up. She puts them, the suitors, all in a stupor, kind of reminding us of what Hermes does at the end of Iliad 24, when all Achilles' warriors kind of go to sleep so that Priam can leave safe. Same kind of gig here. She makes them all kind of sleepy and tired. They all go home to their sleep, and we have everybody on the ship. On with your voyage, she will say, and a good wind comes up, and they set sail for Peleos and Nestor. All right, so let's turn now and look at some lines to finish our study really quickly. And as I've said so many times, I love this poetry. I wish I could just read it all to you, and I can't. I don't have the time. But let's at least read some. The opening lines of Book 2. When young Dawn, with her rose-red fingers, shone once more, the true son of Odysseus sprang from bed and dressed. Over his shoulder he slung his well-honed sword. By the way, notice this is almost like that term we used in the Iliad, the Aristeia, when a warrior gets ready for his battle, victory type of experience or whatever. We're told he fastened rawhide sandals under his smooth feet, stepped from his bedroom, handsome as a god. Athena's going to make him look amazing. At once he ordered heralds to cry out loud and clear, summoned the flowing-haired Achaeans to full assembly. Their cries rang out. The people filed in quickly, and they're all ready to go. By the way, he shows up, we're told, looking strong. He walks in with a bronze spear, and 2 sleek hounds went trotting at his heels. In other words, young Telemachus doesn't look all of a sudden like a little boy anymore. This is going to be significant, right? Athena lavished a marvelous splendor on the prince. All the people gazed in wonder. This is the 3rd time that we're told, amazed or astonished or gazed in wonder as he stepped forward. The elders coming together, and then all of a sudden we have Aegyptus asking, what in heaven's name is going on and why are we here? Telemachus' speech is in fact a thing of wonder. It's a fascinating speech because it will begin by him saying, I'm the man who called the assembly. But in the middle of it all, he's going to say, I'm a boy who can't take care of these suitors. Obviously, there's 108 of them. And then finishes his speech by crying, right? Let's take a look at some of this, though, just so we, just so we get a sense of it, all right? He says, I was the one, by the way, I meant line 45. I was the one, he says, who called us all together. Something wounds me deeply. Not news I've heard of any army on the march, word I've caught firsthand, so I can warn you now, or some other public matter I'll disclose and argue. No, the crisis is my own. Trouble has struck my house, a double blow. First, I've lost my noble father who ruled among you years ago, each of you here, and kindly as a father to his children. But now this, a worse disaster, that soon will grind my house down, ruin it all, and all my worldly goods in the bargain. Suitors plague my mother. Against her will, sons of the very men who are your finest here. They'd sooner die than approach her father's house. So Icarus himself must see to his daughter's bridal hand. her to whom he likes. Now, this Icarus, the father of Penelope, will be mentioned several times as the one, if Odysseus is actually dead, he's the one that should be taking care of who she will marry and all of that. Remember your patriarchy, right? Not they, he's talking about the suitors. They infest our palace day and night. They butcher our cattle, our sheep, our fat goats, feasting themselves sick, swilling our glowing wine, as if there's no tomorrow, all of it squandered. They're violating Xenia, in other words. Now we have no man like Odysseus in command to drive this curse from the house. We ourselves, we're hardly the ones to fight them off. All we do is parade our wretched weakness. A boy, inept in battle. So in other words, he says it, I'm just a kid. Or, oh, he said, oh, I'd swing to attack if I had the power in me. By God, it's intolerable what they do. Disgrace, my house, a shambles. And then he says it, you should be ashamed yourselves, mortified in the face of neighbors living round about. Fear the gods' wrath before they wheel in rage and make these crimes recoil on your heads. All of this is in some regards setting up the whole blame game at the end of the Odyssey when Odysseus comes in and he jacks all these 108 guys. There are going to be a number of family members of these men who are going to be very offended, and they're going to be ready to fight against Odysseus, and Athena's going to have to call ceasefire. But what the poet is already doing is telling us these suitors are going to get exactly what they deserve, and the family members who allowed it to happen, you're allowing your sons ultimately and your relations as suitors to ultimately be jacked, right? It's your fault. He says, I beg you by Olympian Zeus, by Thermus too, who sets assemblies free and calls us into session, stop, my friends, leave me alone to pine away in anguish. Unless, of course, you think my noble father Odysseus did the Achaean army damage, deliberate harm, and to pay me back, you do me harm deliberately, setting these parasites against me. In other words, you owe me because my father was such a good leader. Filled with anger, he finishes, down on the ground, he dashed the speaker's scepter. We think about jacking the conch in Golding's Lord of Flies, right? He throws the speaker scepter down, bursting into tears, and we're told that pity seized the assembly. It will be Antinous then, again, no mind, nous means mind, so anti-mind, anti-nous. Antinous then, he has a very interesting speech, starting at line 90. He says, so, high and mighty, Telemachus, such unbridled rage. Interesting the word rage gets used, right, because that's the first word of the Iliad. Well, now, fling your accusations at us, think to pin the blame on us, you think again. It's not the suitors here who deserve the blame, it's your own dear mother, the matchless queen of cunning. 2 observations for your notes. 1, notice how the Odyssey has to this point been about the blame game. It started with Zeus saying, gods are not to blame for all the terrible things that happen. And then it just kind of continues now. And notice Antinous says, it's not our fault that we are doing what we're doing, that we're bloodsuckers. It's your mom's fault. And then notice cunning. That is to say, Penelope is oftentimes referenced as being the co-equal of Odysseus in cunning, right? Look here. For 3 years now, getting on to 4, she's played it fast and loose with all our hearts, building each man's hopes, dangling promises, dropping hints to each, but all the while with something else in mind. This was her last masterpiece of guile. She set up a great loom in the royal halls, and she began to weave. I told you that weaving is going to be one of the penultimate symbols of our text. And the weaving fine spun the yarns endless, and she would lead us on. Young men, my suitors, she would say, now that King Odysseus is no more, go slowly, keen as you are to marry me, until I can finish off this web. It's interesting that web is the word that gets out. It's almost like a spider spinning out a web, Antinous says. He finishes by saying her very words, and despite our pride and passion, we believed her. So by day she'd weave at her great and growing web. By night, by the light of torches set beside her, she would unravel all she'd done. 3 whole years she deceived us, blind, seduced us with this scheme, which obviously doesn't say much about the intelligence of the suitors, that it takes them 3 years to finally figure it out. By the way Antinous says the way they found out is one of the girls who's servants of Penelope sold her out. And then we're told that they found out and they forced her to finish it off. Telemachus is now going to be addressed directly by Antinous. Now Telemachus, here is how the suitors answer. You burn it in your mind, you and all our people, send your mother back. Direct her to marry whomever her father picks, right? And we're told that as long as she persists in tormenting us, quick to exploit the gifts Athena gave her, a skilled hand for elegant work, a fine mind, subtle wiles too. In other words, Antinous keeps talking about the fact that Penelope can't be trusted. We've never heard the like. He says, even in the amazing stories that we tell about women, we've never heard about a woman like Penelope. No one can equal Penelope for intrigue. But in this case, she intrigued beyond all limits. So, we will devour your worldly goods and wealth as long as she holds out. Holds to that course the gods have charted deep inside her heart. Great renown she wins for herself, no doubt. Great loss for you in treasure. Will not go back to her old estates or leave for other parts. Not until she weds the Argive man she fancies. Right? It's pretty clear that for the suitors, this isn't about sex with Penelope as much as it is about power and wanting all of the stuff that Odysseus has, right, on some level. We're told that at line 145, though, the calm, good sense of Telemachus replied. So he's kind of, he's not crying anymore, is our point. He says, Antinous, how can I drive my mother from our house against her will? The one who bore me and reared me too. In other words, I have to show respect. Notice the subtle, I have to show respect. You're clearly not showing respect. My father is worlds away, dead or alive, who knows? Imagine the high price, he says, I'd have to pay to Penelope's father, right, if I were to do this. And he says, if I were to send my mother away, leaving her own house behind, she would call down withering furies on my head. This is interesting, given, of course, Aeschylus's the Oresteia, right, and more particularly that idea of the Furies in the third of those plays, right, that call down on Orestes to punish him for killing his mother, right. I'll never issue that ultimatum to my mother. And then he says it again, you must leave my palace, right. Go, in other words, go eat somewhere else. Go, kind of do your thing somewhere else. And then he calls on Zeus to wreak down vengeance. And then immediately you've got these two eagles that come down. They thrash at line 170. Wings thrashing, wild onslaught of wings banking down on the crowd's head. Glaring fatal signs, so right above their head, you got these talons slashing each other, tearing cheeks and throats. They swooped away on the right. This is, of course, important that it's on the right, so it's good news. And all of a sudden, you've got Halitherses, who's this old man, and he looks up and he says, hear me, men of Ithaca, hear what I say. A great disaster is rolling like a breaker towards your heads. In other words, a huge tidal wave is coming. Clearly, Odysseus won't be far from loved ones any longer now. Right now, he's somewhere near, I tell you. This is a compelling way for the poet to remind us that while we are on Ithaca, this is a poem about Odysseus. His son, of course, is taking center stage now, along with, obviously, Penelope and the bad guys. But this is a way to be reminded, oh yeah, Odysseus, he's coming. He's going to come back. Clearly, Odysseus won't be far from loved ones any longer. Now, right now, he's somewhere near, I tell you, breeding bloody death for all these suitors here. Right? He says, I can see it now at line 190. Odysseus, all is working out for him, I say, just as I said it would that day the Argives sailed for Troy and the mastermind of battle boarded with them. I said then, after many blows, and all his shipmates lost, after 20 years had wheeled by, he would come home unrecognized by all. This is, of course, telling us exactly what's going to happen, right? Odysseus will show up with the help of Athena incognito. And now, look, it all comes to pass. It will be Eurymachus who will, in fact, say to him at line 200, shut up, O man, stop, O man, right? Go home and babble your omens to your children. Save them from catastrophe coming soon. Odysseus, he's dead now, far from home. Would to God that you died with him too. Telemachus, he says, he's kind of continuing, because his prophecy is nobody's leaving anywhere. Telemachus, he says, here in front of you all, here's my advice for him. Let him urge his mother back to her father's house. The same argument. Her kin will arrange the wedding, provide the gifts. Not till then, I'd say, will the island princes quit their taxing courtship. Notice the gaming of the wording of taxing, right? Who's there to fear, he says. I ask you, surely not Telemachus with all his tiresome threats. Nor do we balk, O man, at the prophecies you mouth. They'll come to grief. They'll make us hate you more. The prince's wealth will be devoured as always, mercilessly, no reparations ever. In other words, there will be no Xenia whatsoever. Well, Telemachus will respond for this one, and he will come right back and he will say, I got no words for you. I'll say no more. At line 235 or so, he says, the gods know how things stand, and so do all the Achaeans. And by the way, the poet reminds us the gods do know how things stand. Athena knows what's going on, which is why she's going to be so brutal at the end of this poem in terms of jacking these guys, right? He says it. Now all I ask is a good swift ship, a crew of 20 men. I'm sailing off to Sparta and sandy Pylos. He says, I'm looking for news of my long-lost father's journey home, right? Maybe I'll catch a rumor from Zeus, he says, and so off I go. Mentor will then step up, and he says to the men of Ithaca, he says, hear me, men of Ithaca, hear what I have to say. Never let any sceptered king be kind and gentle now, dark irony here. Not with all his heart, or set his mind on justice. No, let him be cruel and always practice outrage. Think of our comments later about Plato's Republic will come to mind. What makes a good king? Think. Not one of the people whom he ruled remembers Odysseus now, that godlike man, and kindly as a father to his children. He's forgotten. Tennyson will pick up on this, by the way, in his poem Ulysses. He's forgotten. You've totally forgotten about the man. He's been gone 20 years, right? I don't grudge these arrogant suitors for a moment, weaving their violent work, again this word weaving coming back, with all their wicked hearts. He says, what they get, blind in their violence, will be what they deserve. However, for the rest of you, the men of Ithaca, how you rouse my fury, sitting here in silence, never a word per forth, to curb these suitors, paltry few as they are, and you so many. It will then be Leocritus who will say, Mentor, you need to shut up, rabble-rousing fool, in line 273. Now what's with all this talk? He says, if Odysseus of Ithaca, even if he did arrive in person to find us well-bred suitors feasting in his halls, and the man were hell-bent on routing us from the palace, little joy would his wife derive from his return for all her yearning. Here on the spot he'd meet a humiliating end if he fought against such odds. You're talking nonsense, idiocy. In other words, if Odysseus does come back, there are 108 of us, we'll jack him. Whoa. Which tells us a whole lot about these suitors, right? I mean, they obviously have a level of confidence.